Hey everyone! So in my last video, I said that I'm going to talk about Middle Eastern and North African house guests in Big Brother Canada in this video, and I'm really excited for this one. As we go through the racial and ethnic groups of the American and Canadian shows of Big Brother, you start to notice some discrepancies and differences. The main one that I've noticed for Big Brother Canada is that they tend to cast a lot more Middle Eastern and North African house guests compared to Big Brother US, and they tend to cast more Middle Eastern and North African house guests compared to other racial or ethnic groups. So I find it interesting that they're prioritizing this group of people, and it's really needed. So when I talked about this group of people in Big Brother US, I had to combine the Western Asians and North Africans with all the other Asian ethnic groups because there wasn't enough of any of them to talk about on their own. And it says a lot that Big Brother Canada has 10 seasons compared to Big Brother US's 24 seasons, and they're able to more than double the amount of Middle Eastern and North African house guests. And it just really shows how little Big Brother US cares about this group of people, as they tend to prioritize other racial or ethnic minority groups instead. So we're going to go through the list and see what happened over the course of the 10 seasons pertaining people who fit into this ethnic or racial group. Before I start off, I want to say that I might get a few people wrong, or there's a few people that I should have added on this list, but I couldn't find enough information to find out whether they're Western Asian or South Asian, so if there are any mistakes or I'm leaving someone out, that is why. So the first person on this list is Talla from Big Brother Canada 1. She was the first Middle Eastern woman to be cast in North American Big Brother history, as Victoria from Big Brother 14 was cast a year later in BBUS. She, as well as Victoria, were mainly cast to be bubbly casting fodder and to be portrayed as jokes. She definitely had a quote-unquote fiery personality that was captured several times throughout the season and production took advantage of. Outside of that, I'm not too sure how her race or ethnicity played a part in her journey in the Big Brother Canada house, and I don't recall them touching much on her ethnicity whatsoever. So the second person who is on this list is Adel from Big Brother Canada 2. And his portrayal on this show was very similar to Cassandra from Big Brother US 6 and 7. So there was a confrontation about cultures and religion mainly between himself and Sabrina that took place in the very first week, and this really bad argument that happened between them caused a conflict that would last throughout the rest of the season, and she clearly said something that he took as offensive, and they were just oil and water throughout the entire season. It was played for comedic relief on the show, but it was clearly something very seriously and that he took very seriously, but they didn't really address it too in depth. So pertaining his journey on the show, he was immediately put on the outs in the beginning of the season, though the big alliance and some of the affiliates were majority white people, and all of his allies went home in the pre-jury but himself. He was portrayed very positively. He was allowed to talk about his ethnicity, culture, religion, so on and so forth, just like Kaysar was allowed to in Big Brother 6. But some other Arabian men were not given this opportunity, so the fact that they gave Adele this opportunity is great. So the next person that we are going to talk about is Neda from Big Brother Canada 2 and Big Brother Canada 5. Props to Big Brother Canada for casting more than one Middle Eastern and North African person to be on a cast, which is something Big Brother US has still yet to do in their 22 years. So when I look at Neda's experience, there really isn't anything to discuss pertaining how her ethnicity and race played a part in her experience on her 2 seasons. But she would unknowingly start a new archetype that seeped through many seasons of Big Brother Canada, which is the smart, strategic Persian woman. In general, Middle Eastern as well as South Asian women are usually portrayed as being smart, and education is usually a huge thing in those ethnic groups, so it shouldn't be too shocking that that's the route they went with Neda, but they turned it into a huge archetype that Big Brother Canada has run with. Actually, there is something that I forgot about. Looking at her journey in Big Brother Canada 5, Cassandra, who is also Persian, was on the cast as well, and both of them would go back and forth throughout the few weeks they were there together about being the quote-unquote token Persian mastermind girl, as they were both fan favorites in their seasons, and production loved them both. But they realized they were cast to be in the same slot in the same season, so seeing them go back and forth about that and how they wanted there to quote-unquote only be one, and Neda using her HOH to take Cassandra out, partially due to it, was very sad to watch. And that tends to happen with a lot of minority groups in Big Brother, especially Big Brother Canada now that I've looked into it. So the next person that we are going to discuss is Naeha from Big Brother Canada 3, and her journey unfortunately isn't a positive one. Unfortunately, she would suffer from the consequences of the new archetype that was created the year beforehand, and being on the season after it was being created. Most of her house guests on the season would call her Neda, they would big her up as some huge strategic threat, and simply put, never gave her a chance to be her own player or a person, as it led to her early eviction in the beginning of the third week, and causing her to be second last out of everyone in Big Brother Canada. Of course, people are going to compare to what is familiar, especially when it comes to Big Brother and comparing the current to the past, but this always happens a lot more with people of color, since there usually aren't as many people of color put on the shows, so they just compare them to the most recent one, and Naeha unfortunately suffered from the negative implications due to that. So the next person we are going to move on to is Ramsay from Big Brother Canada 4. He had an extremely quiet edit, and it seemed like they did not know what to do with him, since he didn't fit into any cultural or racial or ethnic archetypes. This reminds me of Joseph's experience from the most recent season of Big Brother US, where he was hugely under-edited because they couldn't fit him into a racial or cultural archetype or a stereotype in general, so they just kind of ignored both of them, which is a huge shame, since it was a chance for them to show that Middle Eastern men can fit into many different boxes, but they just chose not to do that here. He did not get along with Cassandra during the season, and I wonder if there's some undertone of an Arab versus Persian feud element towards their conflict, since that tends to happen in reality in the Middle Eastern community. They were targeting one another the entire season, and it never really made a whole lot of sense. So I'm wondering if this undertone was actually an overtone as to why they just didn't gel with one another. I have mentioned her in the last two people's sections, so now it's time to talk about Cassandra from Big Brother Canada 4 and Big Brother Canada 5. So she clearly failed the same or a similar archetype that Naeha and Neda did with the quote-unquote Persian mastermind casting slot, and she embraced it more than ever. Unlike them though, she was a lot more boisterous in her personality, and she was a lot more humorous in comparison, so that did make her stand out. So overall, from the beginning, everyone saw her as immediately untrustworthy, and of course throughout the season, she didn't do much or anything to improve on that reputation. I noticed that the White House guests in the season always forgave one another a lot more than they would forgive the people of color in the game, and I think that happened to Cassandra a lot in Big Brother Canada 4, especially around the last third of the season, with Jared, Kelsey, and their cats, as they were all just really frustrated with her, simply put, for playing the game, and she never really took it to a personal level. But whenever Jared or Kelsey did something to the Paquette brothers, or vice versa, they were always so willing to forgive one another, even if it did become personal. So I do think Cassandra suffered from that. Like I mentioned with Neda in Big Brother Canada 5, she and Neda were going back and forth about who would be the quote-unquote token Persian girl in the season, and unfortunately Cassandra lost the battle, as I do think she was more focused on the fan base and Twitter elements of the game instead of actually playing the game well and properly. She was too focused on the meta elements, and she became a shell of her former self to her archetype, pretty much. So we are going to move on to Rozina from Big Brother Canada 6, and there really isn't much of anything to discuss. Though it is impressive that they managed to cast 3 people from the Middle Eastern North African community. So Rozina was the first boot, and we of course did not get to see her on the feeds. Maybe her being a minority and an older woman made it harder for her to fit in and made it her an easy target, which I also mentioned with Kaylin from Big Brother Canada 7. As there's been a few cases where older white women were able to skate by, so it might be easier for older white women compared to people of color, older women to skate through the house. So the next person from Big Brother Canada 6 is Hamza. So he has mentioned several times outside of the house how uncomfortable he was in the Big Brother Canada 6 house, with the majority of the house guests being white and him feeling like he didn't have much, if anything, in common with them. He was lumped in with the black house guests of the season, and I think that's partially why he was so bitter against the Dereks and the Jessies of the season at the time, since he saw what he thought or assumed what they represented, and that might have been based off of past experiences. As we have discussed in Big Brother US, and as we will continue to discuss in Big Brother Canada, you will notice that Middle Eastern men tend to be grouped in with black people or black men a lot by the White House guests. So that's definitely a thing that happens in Big Brother. So the third and final person from Big Brother Canada 6 is Paras, who won the season. So I remember she always talked about her very strict parents and how strict her background was, so she wanted to portray herself in a certain way, which makes sense. It got to the point where the fans started speculating that her parents spoke to either production or the network, and she would be blocked from feeds for a very long time, for weeks on end, especially pertaining her interactions with Jessie and other information that would happen throughout the season. She clearly felt pressure to represent her family and culture very well, which is understandable. And while she did fit into the quote-unquote Persian mastermind slot as some of her predecessors, it came off as extremely contrived compared to the likes of Neda and Cassandra, where they made her out to be some sort of mastermind and made her look like she had a lot more control over the game than she actually did. But it ended up paying off since she did win the season, so there it is, from Paris. So we're going to skip a few seasons unless I'm missing people, and if I did miss anyone, please list it in the comments. And we finally get our first North African contestant in North American Big Brother history with Austin. So it should not have taken 20 years for this to happen in order to have a North African contestant on US or Canada. But of course it happened on Canada because they are more risky and more interested in diversity. Despite that, I don't think her race or ethnicity played much of a part, if at all, in her journey throughout Big Brother Canada 9. She got along with the side of the house that had a majority of the white people in the house, but she was closest to Brayden in the house. Maybe that's why she didn't really discuss her ethnicity or race much in the house, especially compared to most of the black house guests and Kiefer, who are on the other side of the house compared to her. A lot of fans felt a way about her being left out of the diversity package in the finale, and it's just an example about how non-black people of color, especially Middle Eastern and North African house guests, are generally invisible in Big Brother US and Big Brother Canada, and in media in general. And that's why they're fighting so hard to have representation, and it's part of the reason why, especially in America, they're fighting so hard to not be grouped into the white category of the US Census. So this erasure of Austin in that diversity package in the finale is just proof of the struggles that Middle Eastern and North African people continue to go through in order to have their ethnicity or racial group be acknowledged. So the final person I'm going to discuss is Moose from Big Brother Canada 10. So he was grouped in with the black house guests in some quote-unquote false cookout alliance, mainly by Cal, who he knew from university, even though he wasn't black. Very interesting that this happened on both the 2022 Canada and the US seasons, and by someone named Kyle, a white man. putting a Middle Eastern North African person, here Moose, and in the US, Joseph, and automatically grouping them with black people. I also mentioned that this kind of happened with Hamza as well, but to a lesser extent. Cal split up the alliance that they were all a part of and targeted Moose due to it during the third week, and using his racial paranoia to do so. Moose would have been gone had he not won the veto that week, but the lingering effect of this POC/Cookout alliance never left, and it started reappearing during the week where he was nominated against Tanisha. I also remember that throughout the season, people in the house liked yelling and starting drama with him. You see this quite a bit with Stephanie, Kyle, and even Betty throughout the season. And I mentioned with Summer how some of the house guests in the season felt very comfortable yelling at and being more aggressive with people of color compared to the white house guests, and it just rubbed me the wrong way. What happened to him in the house, as well as a few of the other Middle Eastern men or North African men that I have discussed in this video and in the US video, shows why a lot of POC feel scared to even interact, talk to one another, because it is always made to seem like it is some huge deal and it's threatening for some reason, though several White House guests can talk and no one thinks anything of it. Also, he is the second North African contestant to be on Big Brother North America, whether it's US or Canada, and it's impressive that they cast 2 North African house guests back to back. But even with Arissa being promoted in order for them to extend their diversity, which they kind of have a diversity quota that they're expanding like the US, it's not as officiated, but they're still underrepresenting, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, Middle Eastern and Northern African house guests, since they've cast 1 in each of the 2 seasons, though there have been a few seasons where there have been more than 1 of them in a season. So like I mentioned, it is crazy that there's a bigger sample size in Big Brother Canada compared to Big Brother US, despite the latter having more than double the amount of seasons. What is interesting here is that there are a lot more tropes or casting slots for Middle Eastern and Northern African house guests, and I like how they've allowed them to spread their wings a bit more, though there's still some problematic elements because some of them have been under-edited due to fitting a racial casting slot or portraying them in the way that they felt like they should be portrayed. I think just from my memory, I believe Middle Eastern and Northern African house guests are the second most represented ethnic group in Big Brother Canada, which is different from Big Brother US because it is the Latinos or the Latinas who are the second highest represented minority group. So I'm probably going to make a video like I made for the Asian house guests and combine South Asians, Southeast Asians, and East Asians and talk about all of them in that video, since I don't believe there's as much of them to talk about on their own within each category group, to make a video on each of the groups on their own. So that's most likely what I'm going to do next, and thank you all for following me with this video and this journey. I'll be back with another video soon.